Take a minute to think about some of your favorite stories. Books, TV shows, movies, you name it. Is there any violence in them? Is that violence justified by heroism? Hello there, my fandom friends, and welcome to another video. This video in particular is not going to be about a certain fandom, basically all fandoms that you can think of. However, I am going to be pulling the majority of kind of my focus of this video from manga 8 of Vinland Saga by the author Makoto Yukimura. To give you some background before jumping in, I watched this series, absolutely fell in love with it last year, and I'm currently reading the book series. Once I got to manga 6, there's something that the author talked about toward the end of the book that got me so fixated on why I'm making this video and the message that I want to come across. At the end of all of these books, the author opens up a Q&A for fans to write him any kind of questions they have, and then he answers them at the end of these books. So I'm just going to read you one of the questions that a fan had and then his response to it, and then we're going to basically break this down. The question that someone asked was, you said previously that one of the reasons you decided to draw Vinland Saga was because you wanted to address the theme of violence. Was there any event in your life or in the world that made you want to write about this theme? If you don't know anything about this series, that's totally okay, because the message that I'm going to be talking about and the author's answer to this question is so widespread to all fandoms, and basically this theme of violence. I, of course, am going to highly suggest you check out this series because it is so uniquely written, and the message that comes across in this story is something that I think the world really needs, especially now as life is just constantly changing and evolving. However, today we are going to be doing a deep dive on the author's response to this question about violence in stories. So now I'm going to be reading the author's response, so all of this is going to be in quotes from the author Makoto Yukimura. It's not that there was any specific experience or event that made me want to write about the theme of violence. It's just that in the hero manga of my beloved Japan, no matter what the story is, most of the protagonists are the strongest in that they are the best at doing violence. Meanwhile, the characters who aren't skilled in violence are portrayed as weak. So the story unfolds with the hero repeatedly beating up the bad guys one after another. Usually, no matter what happens, it's difficult for the hero to escape this destiny. But what would happen to a hero manga if the protagonist really wished he could escape from this fate of violence? Could you still tell that story without it losing its entertainment value? I decided that I wanted to try that out. That's one of the many reasons I chose violence as a theme. After reading that for the first time as I finished manga 6 of this series, I was just blown away by all of the reflecting I had to do on this single answer from this amazing author. And I think you should too, based on all of the stories that you've consumed throughout your life. How many of them have violence? And how much of that is justified by this kind of fog that the hero has to save the day through violence? So we're going to break down this quote basically sentence by sentence and kind of just talk about this. So starting off with the sentence, it's just that in the hero manga of my beloved Japan, no matter what the story is, most of the protagonists are the strongest in that they are the best at doing violence. Now, I'm going to expand on this quote. The author does, of course, talk about just anime, but you can relate this to literally any story that you have ever been exposed to throughout your whole life. This could be a book, this could be a manga, this could be a TV show, this could be a movie. Any different country's style of creating a story has this image that violence is in everything. So growing up in school, we were always taught that the protagonist is the good person who basically comes in, saves the day, saves the world from the antagonist or the bad people who are usually committing crimes or doing something poorly upon the world. Any kind of superhero story is a prime example of this. Think about all of your favorite stories where there's a hero or a protagonist and they're fighting against the bad people, the antagonists, these villains. I literally have My Hero Academia and Demon Slayer stuff around me as I talk about this, which is just crazy because everything that I love and everything that I love talking about has violence. And is that okay? Is that good to teach the world? Going to the next sentence, the author states, meanwhile, the characters who aren't skilled filled with violence are portrayed as weak. Just think about that and how true that is. It's insane how stories nowadays always portray the heroic, mighty characters as the ones who are out there physically fighting. In other words, using violence. And if you aren't that main character or aren't that prime fight of a character, you're just considered kind of weak or the side character. A prime example of this are like the nerd type characters in stories. They're the ones that are always made fun of and the ones that are seen as weak when maybe that's just a false image of us as people being so used to the concept of violence that we are throwing that onto those kinds of characters as being weak instead of actually maybe strong. In my personal opinion, I almost think that those characters are stronger for not using violence and not physically fighting than the ones that are. In my opinion, I think it's very wrong to accuse non-violent people or characters as being weak. Literally, what is that teaching people? That's teaching people to be violent, and that is not what we want. Moving on to the next couple of sentences, the author quote says, "So the story unfolds with the hero repeatedly beating up the bad guys one after another. Usually, no matter what happens, it's difficult for the hero to escape this destiny." Those two sentences alone sum up literally every single story I can think of. Most stories I can think of always end up with a happy ending where we have our protagonist or our good guy or our hero coming in and saving the day, saving the world, whatever the goal or task may be. But what I think is often glossed over and not thought about much is what is that character doing in order to gain that victory? In most cases, the hero is doing the exact same thing as the villain. They are fighting, they are using violence, they are beating up the bad guys, as the author states. And the protagonists and the heroes in these stories are often forced into that situation. Maybe they don't want to fight or use violence, but they're forced into doing it and they don't question it. And I think that's what's so wrong about a lot of stories that we've had growing up and that are continued to be written today is that this big kind of theme of violence is never really questioned. It's just assumed that yes, people are going to see that as an entertainment value, and yes, I'm going to put that in my book. Because where would the story go if the hero doesn't fight back? Would they just die? Would the world crumble? And who wants to see that? Which leads into the author's last paragraph, which quote is, "But what would happen to a hero manga if the protagonist really wished he could escape from this fate of violence? Could you still tell that story without it losing its entertainment value? I decided that I wanted to try that out." Exactly as the author says, people would lose interest in a story that doesn't involve violence, this kind of fight and this battle, this war between hero and villain, protagonist and antagonist, good guy versus bad guy story. Most people are going to have this disappointment of there being a non-violent story. And so I guess the main point about all of this theme of violence, is what does that say about us as people and what do we find as entertaining? It's violence. And in my personal opinion, I think that's very sad. Even if I were to reflect on all of the stories that I love, like I was saying earlier, some of the things behind me are some of my favorite fandoms. The things in front of me, like my Legend of Zelda wall, my Death Note wall, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, all of the fandoms that I love with all my heart, everything has violence at the end of the day. Obviously, I'm not saying just stop reading every single story with violence in it, because of course that wouldn't really be the best course of action. Most people fall on books and movies and TV shows to get away from real life. My whole YouTube channel is literally talking about all of my favorite fandoms that I love, that you love. And so that's also kind of a reason why I wanted to take a step back and talk about this series, Vinland Saga, and what the author has to say about this whole theme of violence and how just unique and different I think that this makes the story. Vinland Saga, in my opinion, is a true testament to a beautiful piece of artwork and literature. And it's really teaching just the world that violence is a bad thing. Yet we see it in everything, and it's always something that we as people fall back on, either first or resort to later. And it's seen throughout all of the good guys and protagonists and heroes in all of the stories that we consume. And so with that, that is going to conclude my discussion about this whole theme of violence and how it's literally just in our day-to-day life with anything that we consume. But I also wanted to give a shout out to Vinland Saga as a story and the author due to bringing this to my attention more, and I hope that I brought this to your attention if you have not read Vinland Saga yet or seen it. All in all, I think it is a must-watch or read series. There is so much beauty in life to it. I would love to hear from you in the comments what your thoughts are on this whole theme of violence and how authors have been breeding violence for hundreds of years and probably will continue to. Also, let me know if you have read Vinland Saga or seen Vinland Saga and love it as much as I do. I would love to hear from other fans. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you next time. Bye!